When I was very little, I could see these amazing supernatural beings. And they knew these things that I couldn't fathom, and they could do incredible things, and they were amazingly powerful. And they had a secret that I didn't know. I didn't even know what to call them at the time, but later I learned that people call them adults. And the secret they had was that even though, as a kid, they seemed so infinitely more capable than me, one day I was going to become one. Well, it happened. Now I am an adult. And I know because my back hurts whenever I sleep on it wrong. And I know things that a baby can't know. I can do amazing things. I can drive a car. I can manage finances. But I'm still not at the top. There are still amazing supernatural beings out there that we call angels. And people see them when they're in life-threatening accidents. People in the depths of despair hear their voice, and people report angels chasing away evils of all kinds. And these angels have the same secret. They're you. Hey people, what's up? Let's talk about angels. And I would say that angels are just like people. But to say that first there are people and then there are angels and angels are like people, that's wrong because it's going backwards. The human design, the form of a human is actually the form of God. That form shapes heaven into the form of a human being because it's the manifestation of God through many, many people who have died and are in the afterlife and working through the divine design. And then from that, the angelic form happens. And it's just like physically, your little cells are full of these things that are called organelles. An organelle just means little organs. So just like your body has organs, your cells have organelles that do similar things. The large form is present in the small form. So the form of heaven gives angels their human form. So individual angels are human, and they get their humanness from the large-scale humanity of heaven, and that's the source that we get our humanity from. So you and your grandma are human because of a chain of connection that goes all the way back to God. And you know this, maybe not all those details, but you know on some level that the people that you love who have died are angels in heaven. And Swedenborg says that we know this because there is a universal instinct. Every human being has the knowledge that we go on living after death and living as people, just implanted in your mind. There's a spiritual inflow into your mind that makes you know that. This is why cultures all across the world and across time have thought of angels as people. And there's guides, there's honoring of ancestors. There's people that are spiritual that we can interact with in some way. We're going to unpack all that stuff in this episode. And as a bonus, we're going to use the microbes in tap water to talk about the capabilities of the spiritual eye and the conditions that lead to the visions that happen in the Bible. Okay? Are you ready? Let's go. We're going to begin in Heaven and Hell 73, where he says, as heaven is a person in the greatest form, and a community of heaven is a person in lesser form, so an angel is a person in least form. For in the most perfect form, like the form of heaven, there is a likeness of the whole in the part, in the part, in the whole. I mentioned the human body with its organs, and then individual cells with their organelles. You think the body has skin, the cell has a cell membrane, the body has a brain, the cell has a nucleus. But also you see this in solar system, looks like an atom. It's a feature of the divine design that there's this repetition at scale. Swedenborg goes on. The reason for this is that heaven is a commonwealth. Heaven is a commonwealth. In fact, it shares everything it has with each individual. And individuals receive everything they have from the commonwealth. And I'd read that before. And I had thought, okay, yeah, you mean like when you're there, you get free heaven healthcare, or people all work to make it so that everyone has a good quality of life. But I didn't really realize till we were putting this show together that even the form, even the human form, like an angel looks like us, has eyes, ears, mouth, etc. That comes from heaven itself. That heaven shares the structure by which they exist. And that is the same force that shapes our spirits, which then are the things that animate our bodies. Angels and us have the same source and the same essential characteristics. And there's actually an ancient spiritual city, the description of which illustrates that.
In Heaven and Hell 73, Swedenborg says that we can become angels, and that angels are in effect a miniature heaven. So he takes these three things that you might think are distinct: heaven, individual angels, and people who are still alive in the physical universe, and aligns them. Says under the right conditions, first of all, every angel, the nature of heaven is that it's a fractal structure. So every individual angel is a heaven in miniature, not just a part of heaven as it would be in a machine or something, but each individual, if you zoomed in, reflects the entirety of heaven, is a whole heaven all by him or herself. And the same can be true of people on earth, because Swedenborg says one of his astounding claims is that angels are ex-people who lived in the physical universe. It might be a strange way to put it. Or in other words, we can become angels not only after we die, but while we're still alive in this world. Now, how would that happen? Well, to support his point, Swedenborg quotes an interesting source. He quotes the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 17, which doesn't sound at first like it's talking about that at all. It says, "The wall of the holy Jerusalem was measured 144 cubits, the measure of an individual, that is, of an angel." Okay, by the end of that verse, you start to feel like maybe we're a little bit on topic, but where it started with that wall and measurements and so on didn't sound at all like it was talking about what Swedenborg sees in it. What he's talking about there is that the Holy Jerusalem is an image of heaven. The end of the book of Revelation is all about heaven descending on earth in the image of this Holy Jerusalem, or the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. The wall of that city has a particular meaning. And interestingly, it's the measurement of it. Measurement has to do with assessing the quality. Don't we say that in common parlance? That we say, take the measure of the person. Well, that means what sort of person. It doesn't mean how tall are they, or how much they weigh. It's what sort of person are they? So taking the measure of a person, the measure of this wall is 144 cubits. Taken literally, that's quite an absurd measurement. I mean, when it says that this is the measure of an individual, that is of an angel, well, 144 cubits is 216 feet or 66 meters. If it's talking about height, it's a massive wall. But Swedenborg is always reading spiritually. Like, don't get caught up in the physical measurement. It's about what the number 12 means, because 144 is 12 times 12. And 12, there are 12 apostles, 12 tribes. 12 means all different kinds of love and insight, or truth, goodness and truth, as he so often puts it. This is what protects that holy Jerusalem, which is a heaven. And the key to it is that same measurement of love and truth is what is the measure of an individual. Each individual has that protection, has that goodness and truth. And that's exactly the same as what's going on with an angel. An angel is a heaven in least form and has that wall of goodness and truth. So this is an image of how we get to the envisioned heaven on earth, is through individuals now, even while we're still alive in this physical world, before we've even seen the afterlife, becoming a heaven through that goodness and truth that keeps us safe.
We talk about heaven being a commonwealth in the last section, and part of it is common knowledge. There is stuff that you just know being a part of heaven, and that comes through, and actually, if we let it, permeates our minds here on earth, so we have a sense of how things really are. Even though you can't see it with your physical senses, you have a sense of how things really are. That can be pretty intact, except if we mess it up and overcomplicate it. And that which has happened in certain religious traditions. People have actually been pulled away from the basic truth and instinct that says we survive after death, we become angels, and angels are human beings with forms just like us. This is how Swedenborg describes it. First, he appeals to, like a man of the Enlightenment would, appeals to experience. He says, "But let us turn to experience now. As for angels being human forms or people, I have seen this thousands of times. I have talked with them face to face, sometimes with just one, sometimes with several in a group, and as far as their form is concerned, I have seen in them nothing different from that of a human being. At times, I have felt surprised that they were like this, and to prevent it being said that this was some illusion or hallucination, I have been allowed to see them while I was fully awake, or while I was in full possession of my physical senses and in a state of clear perception." So I wasn't just on a trip. But you see this not just in Swedenborg, but in near-death experiences. How many near-death experiences have people seen loved ones who have died, but they're more radiant and they're really angelic, but it's the people. The beings of light people encounter, they're in human form. This is something that, again, all around the world, people in all cultures have talked about. You go to your ancestors in Lord of the Rings, they'll talk about, like, I go to sleep with my forefathers, and people are there. But in Swedenborg's day, what he's pushing back against in this is that theologians had overcomplicated it and destroyed in themselves their ability to sense the basic truth. You have, I think, Thomas Aquinas in Summa Theologica. He talks about angels. They can assume a form. That's why you see in the Bible that they have a form, but they don't really have any form. There was a lot of people in those days saying angels are just kind of thought, immaterial thought and will. You can talk yourself out of the basic truth. And Swedenborg is pretty harsh on the learned about this, because Swedenborg was one of them. If you don't know a little bit of him, his bio, he was super smart, super well accomplished in inventing, in science of all kinds. He was very successful. He was in military, political, very successful at all those levels. Used to think a lot of himself, had this spiritual awakening, saw what was really going on, and would often talk about how you can think yourself out of basic truths. And people did that with angels, to the point where there was these ideas that angels aren't human. Angels don't really have a human form. I'm not trying to get too petty here, but I think I'm going to get petty for a second. So I think that any profession is in danger of doing this. You can talk yourself out of common sense once you get too deep into your jargon. So I was watching a show with my wife and daughter. And it's a show where people paint pictures. I'm not going to get too specific about it because who knows? Maybe these people know exactly what they're doing. But there's people will paint these portraits, and judges will judge which one is the best. And it was down to the last 3 of the season. Everyone else had been eliminated, and there was this one contestant. She was really young. She was 17, but she had done these really good lifelike sketches with pencil. And my daughter, who's just 7, was really pulling for her, really wanted her to win. And there was 2 others, and one of the others really did stuff that didn't look as much like people. It was more like impressionistic and bare bones and sort of what I would say it would look like if you just started painting. But the judges were crazy about that. They're like, oh, it's so inventive and it's so different. And they ended up choosing that person over what just looked so much better, in my humble opinion. And it made my daughter was devastated because she was like, wait, this is better. And I just had this sense of like, I don't know. Can it be you're so into these like nuances of art and trying to be edgy and all that you lose sight of actually what's good art in front of you? I don't know. I'm not going to act like I have good taste in that kind of stuff, but it just got me thinking of what Swedenborg said here. Swedenborg was big on people of simple heart and faith. He talks about people, he says, look, the really educated can twist themselves up in knots and sometimes do great things. Swedenborg, obviously, his education was a big benefit in him being able to understand this. You can do a lot of good things, but there is a tendency to lose yourself in that. But he said people of simple heart and faith, they just get it. They just know that angels are people. That's why in churches and things, even though there was official doctrines about them being different and them not in human form, when they would be represented in a church, like in the Sistine Chapel or something, they're always painted as people, because there's just a sense that, oh yeah, we continue to live, and an angel is just the next step on that journey. This whole thing comes down to being able to see or not see angels. The reason that we have to speculate in videos and argue about whether or not they're this or that is because you can't see them. We don't have the same argument about fire hydrants. People know what they are and they know what they're like. Why can some people see angels and why can most of us not? Well, I'm glad you asked. Swedenborg talks about it here, Heaven and Hell 75. On the grounds of all my experience, which has lasted for several years now, I can say with full confidence that in their form, angels are completely human. They have faces, eyes, ears. Do you ever think about angelic ears? Chests, arms, hands, and feet. They see each other, hear each other, and talk to each other. In short, they lack nothing that belongs to humans, except they're not totally the same. They are not clothed with a material body. That's why we can't see them. I have seen them in their own light, which is far, far greater than noonday on our earth. And in that light, I have seen all the details of their faces more crisply and clearly than I have seen the faces of people here in the world. I'm talking 400K. I have also been allowed to see an angel of the central heaven. So the central heaven is the deepest, highest heaven. His face was more glorious, more radiant than that of angels of lower heavens. I looked at him very closely, and he had a human form in full perfection. Can I just come with what? So this super radiant angel of central heaven, face really glorious, radiant, probably something like, but we have to take Swedenborg's word for it, don't we? Because you can't just go do the same experiment yourself. You can't just walk up and, what do you look like? Why you can't see angels has to do with the eyes you're not using. Swedenborg says that angels have eyes. Let's talk about those eyes. You have a spirit and you have a body. And everything he's saying and asserting about angels, that look, they have all the parts. It's the same about your spirit. Your spirit is not just like a living cloud that inhabits your body or like electrical pulses in you, however you might picture a spirit. Your spirit is in the same exact form, down to individual cells and arteries that your body has. And so you have spiritual eyes, but they're closed right now because your consciousness can only take in one input at a time. You think about a monitor. If you got a couple of HDMI cables plugged into it and you use your little remote to input one, input two, I can't watch this thing. Which one's it on? It's because you're switching signals. So we have our input set to physical, and the physical eye can see physical things. But don't get too reliant on building your worldview around what the physical eye can see, because most of reality it cannot see. And I don't even have to get all spiritual on you to make that point. there's a glass of water. If you look close at it, all right, nothing in there except for water. It's just clear. Look, you look as close as you want. It's just water. Oh, really? Then watch this. I just drank germs. There's germs in there. I mean, they're not bad germs, and there's microbes. I mean, I'm hoping it's tap water. It's fine. There are microorganisms there. There are whole communities in any water of stuff that you can't see. Your eye cannot pick that out just because it's too small. How much more is there beside that we can't see? And particularly because if you had a microscope, you can see that stuff because it is structured in a way that it can see small things. Your spiritual eye is made of spiritual substance, and so it is structured in a way that it can see spiritual things. Swedenborg writes in Heaven and Hell 76, these can be seen by us, these meaning spiritual things, can be seen by us, though, when we are released from bodily sight and the sight of our spirit is opened. This happens instantly when it pleases the Lord that we should see. It then seems to us exactly as though we were seeing with our bodily eyes. This is how angels were seen by Abraham, Lot, Manoah, and the prophets. This is how the Lord was seen by the disciples after the resurrection. This is the same way, too, in which I have seen angels. Well, there's a mechanism. There's a mechanism to it. You might think, oh yeah, there's like these biblical accounts where supernatural things happen. Well, it's just because they happen. I don't know, angels like turn physical I don't know. There's just some way it just happens. There's a mechanism. In all of these cases, it is because the spiritual eyes are opened. And this is a process that is not unique to those people in the Bible and Swedenborg. This is something that can happen to any of us and does happen to people all the time. The mechanism is just you switch inputs. Swedenborg goes on and says that you can see this in the way the Bible is written, this truth about the opening of the spiritual eyes. Because this was how the prophets saw, they are called seers, and ones whose eyes are opened. Your eyes are already open. Everyone's eyes are open. Why are these people called people with eyes opened? And the act of enabling them to see in this way is called opening the eyes. It's because it's talking about spiritual eyes. This is what happened to Elisha's servant, of whom we read, Elisha prayed, Jehovah, open his eyes, I pray, so that he may see. And as Jehovah opened the eyes of his servant, behold, the mountain was full of horses and fiery chariots surrounding Elisha. Because that servant was probably sitting there hearing Elisha, hey, would you open his eyes, please? And he's saying, hey, man, my eyes are open. You're going to open them too wide. His spiritual eyes were closed. Right now, you have spiritual eyes. And if it were to please the Lord, as Swedenborg said, which means if it was the right thing, those things can pop open and you would see the spiritual world right in front of you, including angels. And you would see them like probably angels that you knew hanging out there, fully human and ready to party. So if there's a mechanism, if there's a way in which, or in an orderly fashion, people can see the spiritual world, it just takes the opening of the spiritual eyes. And if Swedenborg is talking about when it pleases the Lord, which means if the divine force that runs through everything and is supposedly ordering things so that benefit comes to all and trying to take the best course of action, why did Swedenborg's eyes get opened? What was the point of it? There are times in what he wrote when he seems to indicate why there's a complex collage or constellation of reasons, but why what his experiences were meant to accomplish. And I would think by proxy the experiences of others who experience similar things. I'm getting my mileage out of that word. Here's where he describes the plight of some good spirits and what they want us to know and what they can know through him having his eyes opening and writing. In Heaven and Hell 77, he says, some honest spirits I talked with about this, about how people thought that angels weren't human, were distressed at heart that there was such ignorance in the church about the state of heaven and about spirits and angels. They kept insisting that I should take back the message that they were not formless minds or ethereal breath, but human in form, and that they saw and heard and felt just as much as people in this world do. And not only are they like us, but they are us. That is the phase that we grow into. And that, I think, the reason why that's so important. It can be a cool idea, but it changes the way that you think about yourself. If you think, my consciousness is going to survive death, it changes what you value. And if you think there's certain parts of me that are going to stay, and certain parts of me that are going to drop away, I'm not going to have the finances I have now. I'm not going to have the same reputation I have now, the same body or looks. But what I care about, what I believe, my personality, my mind, and my heart, that goes on. And there's the potential for me to become an angel if I learn what is good and do it to the best of my ability. It's just like when you got to go to college. That's why it matters when you're taking tests in high school. If you know you've got to get a job, that's why you work in college, to try to get whatever you need to get. So if we know, the point is, the next phase in our growth is to become an angel. Oh yeah, that's gonna change my priorities. And it's super comforting to think all around me, even though my eyes are closed right now, there's a ton of angelic help, and it's human. Like, I know it, I recognize it, it's familiar, and it's something that I can communicate with, interface with, and ultimately love.